Hi guys, and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be reviewing the Hohem Isteady Pro 4 gimbal for action cameras. Now this review is not going to be sponsored in any way. This is completely unbiased as I bought this with my own money and have not received any free gifts or anything like that. So this is my honest review. I hope that's going to be useful. Alright, so this gimbal here is specifically designed for action cameras, like for example the DJI Action, the GoPro and the Insta360 action cameras. So if you're interested in review, let's continue with the video. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go first of all through the advantages that I think this gimbal has, and then I'm going to go through the disadvantages and talk about any issues I found while I'm testing this gimbal. Okay, so first of all, let's go through what's in the book. Now this is not going to be like an unboxing video at all, so I'm going to do it quite quickly. So inside this box, which is actually included as part of the package, you obviously get the gimbal itself. Now it wouldn't be much use if you didn't get the gimbal, so here it is. As you can see, it's made of quite simple plastic, and it's got this little box at the top for holding the action camera. What else is in the box? Well, you've got this little stubby tripod stand here, which clips to the bottom of the actual gimbal in a normal way, and then you've got a series of little cables for connecting to the action camera to the actual gimbal itself, and I'm going to talk about those a bit later in the video. So let's just remove the box for the moment and let's concentrate obviously on the review of the gimbal itself. So first of all, let me just screw it on here so I can show you what I'm talking about. Now one of the advantages of this particular gimbal is this quick release mechanism. Now it's very easy, you just have to pull the little red thing away from the actual box here and then let go, and then you can see here is where you actually insert the actual action camera. So let's actually do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using this GoPro Hero 11 action camera. Okay, so on the actual specifications for this particular gimbal here, it actually mentions using the GoPro up to version 10, but I've actually got a GoPro Hero 11 here, which actually works absolutely fine on this gimbal, so that's good news. So how do I actually fit this? Well, it's just a case of, let me stand the gimbal up here. So it's just a case of lining up the GoPro in a little box like so, and then pulling the actual quick release buckle over the top of the action camera, and at the back of the actual gimbal there's a little hook here, and you just basically stretch the actual plastic to actually go over, and then it simply does that, and you have now mounted the action camera on the gimbal. It's as easy as that. And of course, if you actually want to remove the action camera, you just have to pull the little red hook here. It's a little bit tough, but just pull it away and then very carefully just slide out your action camera. So that is one very good advantage of this particular gimbal, is the way you can just quickly add your action camera. Okay, so what is the next advantage of this particular gimbal? And that is it doesn't require any calibration whatsoever. It's very easy. You just have to mount your GoPro and then just switch on the guy and it's ready to go. So it's very, very fast to use. Let me just power it on. So let me just hold the button down and then it will just springs into life like so. So one of the main advantages of this particular gimbal is the ability to be able to charge your action camera from the gimbal itself. So the gimbal is actually effectively doing like a little power bank, and that is exactly why you've got those leads. Okay, so in the actual box itself you have a number of little leads, very small leads like this, and this is for being able to attach your action camera to the gimbal to be able to charge it. Now on the actual back of the gimbal here, under a little tiny flap, which is very difficult to pull away with your fingers, there's a little USB socket here. So it's a case of being able to connect the lead to the gimbal and then you can just plug it into the action camera. Now one of the advantages is that it can actually charge the camera while you're using it. That is very important. So the battery itself is 36 milliamps in power, so that's pretty good. So it's going to pretty much give you, I would say, a certain number of hours of use with your action camera. So one of the other advantages of this particular gimbal is the actual tripod socket that's actually on the side of the gimbal. So that's useful for attaching things like mobile phone holders or lights or anything like that. Another advantage, you have the tripod socket at the base of the gimbal, so of course you can put this little stand or anything else like that. And also it's actually pretty lightweight, so the actual weight is 365 grams, I said reading the specifications here, but you can see that it is actually quite a light little gimbal. You can just certainly hold it in just one hand. Now one thing to bear in mind with all these controls is they're only available to control GoPro cameras themselves. You can't actually control another action camera like the Insta360 or the DJI Action at all. It's only GoPro cameras, so that is one thing to bear in mind. It's actually quite easy to set up the gimbal to connect to the GoPro camera. And once you do so, you can actually then, when you press the actual gimbal button, it actually powers on the GoPro at the same time, so that is pretty good. So you can pretty much switch on the gimbal and then you are ready to record. Now you've got a series of buttons where you can actually control the GoPro camera if you want it to record. So you just literally press the button in and the GoPro camera starts recording, and then you can press the button again and then the GoPro camera of course stops recording. So that is pretty nice. Alright, so now let's talk about the disadvantages of this particular gimbal. Now the first thing I've noticed is that because the actual cradle, I think it's called a cradle anyway, that holds the action camera is not particularly big, so it's particularly designed for the GoPro camera, and one of the disadvantages is that it actually partially blocks some of the actual screen. If I hold the GoPro camera to you, you can see that the plastic here actually blocks some of the actual back of the GoPro screen. So you don't actually get the full actual width, so if you've got some buttons here, it's a little bit awkward to actually press those buttons. So that's one thing to bear in mind, but it's not a major disadvantage, it's just a little bit of annoyance, I would say. The other disadvantage is if you do actually want to charge the GoPro camera, for the version 11, the actual socket for the actual power is not on the left hand side here, it's actually on the right hand side, which is actually covered by the gimbal here. So what can we do about it? Well, if I just switch off the gimbal, I shall show you the solution for that. And the solution they suggest is that you actually mount the GoPro camera the other way around and turn the gimbal around. So let's do that. So that's a case of just undoing it, turning the gimbal around so it's facing the other direction like this. So rather than the gimbal being on the right hand side, you can twist it around so it is now on the left hand side, and then you can mount the gimbal, and then you not mount the gimbal, mount the camera onto the gimbal as before, strap it down. Let's do that. This time you're hooking the red thing underneath, like so, and then you have access to the little USB charger. You take your little USB-C lead, you can plug that into your socket, and then you can bring that around and plug it into the back of the gimbal, and that allows you to charge it. Alright, so another disadvantage of this particular gimbal is the fact that because the cradle is pretty small, you can't fit something like the GoPro media mod on at all. It's just the actual camera. So if you're a vlogger or anything like that, and if you could well be, because this is particularly specially designed for GoPro cameras, then that is one big disadvantage, I think, compared to other gimbals. Okay, so now let's go through the actual controls on the gimbal itself. So on the back of the gimbal, there's a number of controls. One is the little joystick itself. Now the joystick will allow you to be able to tilt the camera up or down if I bring the joystick up, or tilt the camera down, and if I press it to the left or to the right, it will use the panning action to the left or to the right. Also on the back there is a little switch. Now the switch itself controls the tilt of the camera, so I can tilt it to the left or to the right with that control. Then I've got the on-off switch, which also doubles up as a record button. And I've got another button which allows me to change the actual mode of the actual gimbal. And on the front, I've got a trigger. So the mode button, of course, allows you to go through the various gimbal modes like pan follow, tilt follow, and POV. And the trigger itself allows you to basically set inception mode or set the gimbal to the all lock mode. Okay, so I'm not going to go through those modes in this particular video because I've got a whole video that's dedicated to walking you through the actual modes on this particular gimbal. So feel free to check it out, and I'm going to post a link up here on the right hand side. Or maybe it's going to be in the description and we'll just have to see what it's going to be. So the actual app that comes as part of the actual gimbal is nice. It's not the best design in the world, but it is at least functional. One of the main advantages is you can actually remotely control the gimbal. So for example, if I use a little joystick here, I'm able to make the camera move via the app on the phone, which is quite nice. You can also change the actual mode of the gimbal between the pan, follow and all the various modes. So one of the other nice things is you are able to make a motion lapse, and that's quite unique I think to this particular gimbal at this particular price range. By setting some various points, I think you can have up to 10 actual points in your motion lapse, and then it's going to slowly move between them while taking a little time-lapse film. In addition to that, you are able to access the settings of the gimbal, so you can control things like the follow speed, you control the joystick speed, and now one of the actual other areas which is particularly nice is the ability to control the dead areas. So if you have particularly sensitive hands and you want to make it not quite as sensitive to your movements, then you are able to change the dead area to make it a little bit larger, for example. Okay, so with no further ado, of course you want to see some test footage with this gimbal that I've taken, so let's do that right now. Okay, so my conclusion on this particular gimbal is it particularly good? I think it's quite good for the price. It's certainly the cheapest gimbal. So one of the things I've noticed on this particular gimbal, and I'm not sure whether it's my particular one, is that when you're making like crane motions, for example, it makes very slight corrections to the movement as you move up and move down. Now I find that particularly annoying because I'm a person who absolutely wants crystal solid footage for cinematic quality, so that's one reason I'm not a super fan on this particular gimbal, and I found that the other gimbals I've got don't have this issue. So that's one thing to bear in mind, but maybe it's just my particular gimbal, so I wouldn't necessarily discount it for that particular reason. Okay, so that's it for my review. I hope you find it useful, guys. Of course, if you do, I would appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel and like the video and do all those good things, because it certainly helps me out. Take care, and I shall see you soon.